The coffee shop on Morrison Street had become Jason King's sanctuary in the weeks following the divorce. He sat in the corner booth every morning at 7, nursing a black coffee and watching the city wake up through rain-streaked windows. The barista, a college student named Maya, had stopped asking for his order 3 days ago. She simply brought him the same thing, offered a sympathetic smile, and left him to his thoughts. Jason was 32 years old, though the mirror suggested otherwise lately. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually neat brown hair had grown shaggy, curling at his collar. He wore the same rotation of 3 button-down shirts and jeans, all of them hanging a bit looser than they had 2 months ago. To anyone watching, he looked like what he was, a man whose world had quietly collapsed. The divorce papers had been finalized exactly 17 days ago. Jason had signed them in his attorney's office, a cramped space above a dry cleaner that smelled perpetually of chemicals and disappointment. His ex-wife, Victoria, hadn't even attended. She'd sent her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in a power suit who'd slid the papers across the desk with all the warmth of someone serving an eviction notice. Mrs. King, Ms. Ashford now, has requested that all communication go through our office, the lawyer had said, not meeting Jason's eyes. She's asked that you respect her privacy during this transition. Jason had laughed at that, a short, bitter sound that startled even him. Privacy. As if he'd been the one to shatter their marriage. As if he'd been the one to fall into bed with Marcus Hendrick, the millionaire real estate developer whose face smiled from billboards across the city. He'd signed the papers, taken his copy, walked out into the gray afternoon and just kept walking. For hours. Through neighborhoods he'd never explored, past restaurants where he and Victoria had celebrated anniversaries that now felt like elaborate lies. He'd walked until his feet ached and the sun set, and then he'd found this coffee shop, and he'd been coming back ever since. The irony wasn't lost on Jason. Victoria had left him because, in her words during their final argument, she couldn't spend the rest of her life with someone who lacked ambition. She'd grown tired of their modest 2-bedroom apartment in a respectable but unglamorous neighborhood. Tired of cooking dinners at home instead of dining at the restaurants her friends frequented. Tired of explaining to those same friends that her husband was still figuring things out career-wise. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Jason King was the sole heir to a fortune that would have made Marcus Hendrick's net worth look like pocket change. $125 million. The number still didn't feel real, even though Jason had seen it in writing, had spoken with the estate attorneys, had the bank statements sitting in a locked drawer in his apartment. His grandfather, Theodore King, had passed away 3 years ago, leaving behind an empire built on manufacturing, shrewd investments, and a lifetime of careful planning. The will had been explicit. Jason would inherit everything on his 32nd birthday, but only if he'd spent the preceding years living independently, without knowledge of or access to the family wealth. Theodore King had been a formidable man with old-world values and a deep distrust of inherited privilege. Money ruins the young, he told Jason during one of their last conversations. When Jason was just 19, it makes them soft, entitled. If you're to have what I've built, you'll earn it by proving you can stand on your own first. So the terms had been set. Jason's parents, Theodore's son and daughter-in-law, had been sworn to secrecy. The estate would be managed by a trust until Jason turned 32. Until then, he would live as any ordinary young man would, working, struggling, building a life with his own 2 hands. Jason had turned 32 3 weeks before Victoria left him. The inheritance had been transferred to his name on a Tuesday. He'd received the call from the estate attorney, had taken the day off from his job at the architecture firm where he worked as a junior designer, had sat in a conference room and listened to numbers that seemed to belong to someone else's life. He'd planned to tell Victoria that evening, had even bought champagne. But when he'd arrived home, she wasn't there. Her closet was half empty. Her toiletries were gone from the bathroom. And on the kitchen counter, weighed down by the ceramic bowl they'd bought together in Mexico on their honeymoon, was a note. Jason, I can't do this anymore. I need more than you can give me. Marcus has offered me a life I've only dreamed about, and I have to take it. Please don't try to contact me. Victoria. He'd stood in that kitchen for what felt like hours, champagne bottle sweating in his hand, reading those words over and over. The cruelest part was how neatly she'd folded the note, as if she'd drafted it, revised it, settled on this final version that managed to be both devastating and impersonal. Now, sitting in the coffee shop, Jason pulled out his phone and scrolled through social media, a habit he'd promised himself he'd break but couldn't quite manage. Victoria's Instagram had gone from private to public in the past week, a clear signal that she wanted the world to see her new life. And what a life it was. There she was at a charity gala, draped in a gown that probably cost more than 3 months of Jason's former rent, Marcus Hendrick's arm around her waist. Another photo from what looked like a yacht, Victoria laughing with a champagne flute raised to the camera, the ocean glittering behind her. A selfie in what was clearly a luxury boutique, bags from Chanel and Gucci artfully arranged at her feet. The captions were worse than the photos. Finally living my truth. Grateful for new beginnings. When you know, you know. Jason set the phone down, his coffee gone cold. He didn't feel angry anymore. That had burned itself out in the first week. Now he felt something more complex. A kind of distant curiosity, as if he were watching a character in a movie make increasingly questionable decisions. Because the thing Victoria couldn't understand, was that money without foundation was quicksand. And Marcus Hendrick, for all his billboards and press releases, was standing on ground that was already starting to shift. Jason knew this because he'd done his research. In the 3 weeks since gaining access to his inheritance, he'd met with financial advisors, investment consultants, and one particularly sharp-eyed private investigator named Sarah Chun. Sarah had spent 15 years in corporate intelligence before going private, and she had a reputation for uncovering secrets that people preferred to keep buried. "You want to know about Marcus Hendrick?" she'd asked during their first meeting, one eyebrow raised. "Any particular reason?" "Just curious about the man my ex-wife left me for," Jason had said, trying to sound casual. Sarah had smiled at that, a knowing smile that suggested she'd heard similar stories before. "Give me a week." The report had arrived 6 days later. 53 pages, meticulously documented, painting a picture of a man whose empire was built on credit, aggressive leverage, and increasingly desperate moves to maintain the appearance of success. Marcus Hendrick wasn't exactly broke, but he was circling the drain. 3 of his recent development projects had stalled due to financing issues. He owed significant sums to private lenders, and he'd been named in 2 lawsuits alleging fraud in property deals, cases that were quietly proceeding through the courts while Marcus smiled for cameras and hosted charity events. The yacht Victoria had posed on, rented for the day. The penthouse apartment where she now lived, mortgaged to the hilt, with payments that were eating through Marcus's liquidity faster than he could generate new capital. The luxury lifestyle was real, but it was being funded by borrowed time and borrowed money. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Jason had read the report 3 times, waiting to feel satisfaction or vindication. Instead, he'd felt a creeping sadness. Victoria had traded their honest, if modest, life for a glittering facade. And when that facade crumbled, and Sarah's report suggested it would, within the next 6 to 12 months, she would be left with nothing. "Jason, you okay?" He looked up to find Maya standing beside his booth, concern evident in her dark eyes. "You've been staring at that empty cup for like 10 minutes. Want a refill?" "No, I'm good. Thanks, Maya." She hesitated, then slid into the seat across from him, something she'd never done before. "Look, I know it's not my place, but you've been coming in here for weeks looking like someone kicked your dog, and I get it, breakups are terrible. But at some point, you gotta decide whether you're gonna let it destroy you or whether you're gonna build something new." Jason blinked at her, surprised by the directness. "That simple, huh?" "Not simple, but necessary." She stood up, smoothing her apron. "My mom always says that the best revenge is living well. So maybe stop watching your ex's Instagram and start figuring out what living well looks like for you." She walked back to the counter, leaving Jason alone with her words. Living well. What did that even mean? For the first time in weeks, Jason allowed himself to really think about the future. Not the future he'd planned with Victoria, but a future entirely his own. He had resources now that most people couldn't even imagine. He could do anything, be anything, go anywhere. The question was, what did he actually want? Jason pulled out his phone again, but this time he didn't open Instagram. Instead, he opened his notes app and started writing. Ideas, possibilities, dreams he'd set aside during his marriage because Victoria had dismissed them as impractical or naive. Architecture had always been his passion, but working at a firm meant compromising his vision to serve clients and bosses. What if he started his own practice? Not some corporate behemoth, but a boutique firm focused on sustainable, community-oriented design. Projects that actually mattered. He'd always wanted to travel. Really travel, not just tourist destinations but immersive experiences. Learning from architects and builders in different cultures. Understanding how people created homes and communities in every corner of the world. And there was the foundation work. His grandfather had been quietly philanthropic, funding scholarships and community programs without fanfare. Jason could continue that legacy, expand it, focus on areas that mattered to him. Education, housing, opportunities for young people like he'd been. The list grew longer. By the time Jason looked up, an hour had passed and the coffee shop had filled with the morning rush. He felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not happiness, exactly, but something close to it. Purpose, maybe, direction. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend, David Martinez. They'd met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions and a shared love of vintage motorcycles. David was one of the few people who checked in consistently after the divorce, never pushing but always present. Bike night at Russo's, 7 p.m. You're coming. Not a question. Jason smiled and typed back, I'll be there. He paid his tab, leaving Maya a generous tip, and stepped out onto Morrison Street. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. The city looked different somehow, still the same streets and buildings, but charged with possibility. Jason had 7 hours before meeting David. 7 hours to start figuring out who he wanted to be now that he was finally free to choose. He started walking, not aimlessly this time, but with a destination in mind. The architecture firm where he worked was only 6 blocks away. He'd been operating on autopilot there for weeks, doing the minimum required and nothing more. But there was a project he'd been developing in his spare time, a design for affordable housing units that incorporated green spaces and community areas. He'd shown it to his boss once, had been told it was interesting but not financially viable for our clients. Well, Jason didn't need their clients anymore. He could fund the project himself, find a piece of land, assemble a team, build something that proved good design and social consciousness weren't mutually exclusive. It would be a statement of values, a line drawn in the sand. This is what matters to me. The more Jason thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. He could start small, maybe a single building or complex. Document the process, prove the model worked, and then scale up. Partner with nonprofits and community organizations. Create something that would outlast him. By the time he reached the firm, Jason's mind was racing with possibilities. He took the elevator up to the 5th floor, nodded at the receptionist, and headed for his desk in the bullpen where the junior designers worked. His computer sat waiting, the screensaver cycling through generic nature photos. Jason woke the machine and opened his project file. The affordable housing design filled the screen, clean lines, ample windows, rooftop gardens, ground floor spaces that could serve as community centers or small businesses. He'd spent 6 months developing this in stolen moments and late nights, pouring his heart into every detail. King, my office. Now. Jason looked up to see Gerald Drummond, the firm's managing partner, standing at the entrance to the bullpen. Gerald was in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of permanent frown that suggested he found most of life disappointing. He'd hired Jason 3 years ago with what seemed like reluctance and had treated him like a necessary inconvenience ever since. Jason saved his work and followed Gerald to the corner office. Through the glass walls, he could see the city spreading out below. Buildings Gerald's firm had helped shape, developments that had changed neighborhoods for better or worse. "Shut the door," Gerald said. settling behind his massive desk. Jason complied and took the chair across from him. "I'm going to be blunt," Gerald began. "Your work has been subpar lately. I understand you're going through personal issues, but this is a professional environment. We have deadlines, clients, standards to maintain." "I understand," Jason said carefully. "I'm not sure you do." Gerald leaned forward. "The Patterson project, you've missed 2 revision deadlines. The Costello renovation, your drawings were incomplete. And yesterday, I found out you left the Martin meeting early without explanation." Jason had left because the clients wanted to demolish a historic building to make room for luxury condos that would price out the existing community. He'd listened to them talk about maximizing property value and optimizing returns until he'd felt physically ill and had to step out. "I apologize," Jason said, though he didn't feel apologetic. He felt tired of apologizing for having a conscience. "This is your official warning," Gerald said. "One more incident, and we'll have to discuss your future with this firm." "Understood." Jason looked at Gerald, really looked at him. At the expensive suit, the Rolex on his wrist, the framed articles about projects that had won awards while ignoring the communities they displaced. This was the future Jason had been working toward? 20 years from now, would he be sitting in this chair, delivering warnings to some younger version of himself? "Actually," Jason said slowly, "I don't think that will be necessary." Gerald's frown deepened. "Excuse me? I quit." The words hung in the air between them. Gerald stared at Jason as if he'd started speaking in tongues. "You quit. Effective immediately." Jason stood up, feeling lighter than he had in months. "I appreciate the opportunity you gave me, but this isn't the right fit anymore. I'll clear out my desk this afternoon." He walked out before Gerald could respond, crossing the bullpen to his desk. His coworkers pretended not to watch, but he could feel their eyes on him as he packed his personal items into a box. It didn't take long. He'd never really settled in here. A few photos, some books, the plant Victoria had given him that he'd somehow kept alive. The affordable housing file he copied to a thumb drive and deleted from the company server. That was his, not theirs. 20 minutes later, Jason walked out of the building for the last time, box under one arm. The afternoon sun was stronger now, warming his face. He felt reckless and alive, as if he'd stepped off a cliff and discovered he could fly. His phone buzzed again. Another text from David, "Bringing a couple people tonight. Friend of mine just got back from a year in Japan. Studied traditional carpentry. Think you'd like him." Jason smiled. New beginnings. That's what Maya had called them. He spent the afternoon in his apartment, not moping like he had been, but actively reshaping his space. He took down the photos of Victoria, packed away the things that reminded him of their life together. Not vengefully, but practically. That chapter was closed. It was time to write a new one. At 6:30, he showered, changed into jeans and a leather jacket, and headed for Russo's. The bar was an institution in the neighborhood, a place where motorcycle enthusiasts gathered to talk bikes, trade stories, and occasionally organize group rides. Jason had neglected this community during his marriage. Victoria had found his hobby juvenile, but now he felt drawn back to it. David was already there when Jason arrived, leaning against a vintage Triumph and talking to 2 other people. He lit up when he saw Jason. "There he is. Man, you look better. Like you rejoined the living or something." "Something like that," Jason said, accepting David's hug. "Jason, this is Kenji Tanaka." David gestured to a lean man with short black hair and an easy smile. "The carpenter I mentioned. And this is his girlfriend, Alicia Patel. She's a landscape architect." Jason shook hands with both of them, immediately liking Kenji's firm grip and Alicia's direct gaze. "David says you're an architect," Kenji said. "What kind of work do you do?" "I just quit my job," Jason found himself saying. "So I guess the honest answer is, whatever I want now." Alicia laughed. "That's either the bravest or most reckless thing I've heard all week. Which is it?" "Still figuring that out," Jason admitted. They talked for hours. About design philosophy, about sustainable building practices, about projects that prioritize people over profit. Kenji described the traditional techniques he'd learned in Japan. Joinery so precise it required no nails or screws, buildings designed to last centuries. Alicia talked about urban green spaces, about how nature in the city wasn't just aesthetic but essential for mental health and community cohesion. Jason found himself describing his affordable housing project, pulling up the designs on his phone. He watched Kenji and Alicia lean in, their faces intent, asking questions that showed they understood what he was trying to do. "This is excellent work," Kenji said finally. "Why isn't someone building this?" "Because it's not financially viable," Jason said, using air quotes. "Says who?" Alicia challenged. "Have you run the actual numbers? Or are you just repeating what some corporate boss told you?" Jason paused. He hadn't, actually. He'd taken Gerald's assessment at face value, had let it kill his dream before it could really take root. "What if," David said slowly, "you built it yourself?" "I can't afford," Jason started, then stopped. Because he could afford it. He could afford this and 100 other projects like it. The realization must have shown on his face because David grinned. "There it is. That's the look of a man who just figured something out." They stayed at Russo's until nearly midnight, the conversation expanding to include others from the motorcycle community. Someone knew a real estate agent who specialized in underdeveloped urban lots. Someone else had a cousin who worked in city planning, who might be able to navigate the permit process. By the end of the night, Jason had 6 new contacts in his phone and a growing sense that something significant was taking shape. He rode home on his motorcycle, a restored Honda CB750 he'd bought years ago and rebuilt himself, feeling the city rush past him. The night air was cool, the streets mostly empty, and for the first time since Victoria left, Jason felt grateful. Grateful for the pain that had forced him to reevaluate everything. Grateful for the freedom to start over. Grateful for friends who saw him not as he'd been, but as he could be. Over the next 3 weeks, Jason threw himself into planning. He met with the real estate agent and found a property. 2 acres in a neighborhood that had been neglected by developers, dismissed as unprofitable. The price was reasonable, and the location was perfect. Close to public transit, near a park, with a diverse community that would benefit from quality affordable housing. He assembled a team. Kenji signed on as the lead craftsman. Alicia would design the landscape and community spaces. He hired an environmental engineer, a project manager with nonprofit experience, and a lawyer who specialized in community development. And through it all, Jason kept his inheritance quiet. He paid people fairly, invested in quality, but didn't flaunt his wealth. The money was a tool, not an identity. He'd learned that lesson from watching Victoria chase Marcus Hendrick's lifestyle. Speaking of which, he heard through mutual friends that things in Victoria's new relationship weren't going as smoothly as her Instagram suggested. The veneer was cracking. Marcus had become increasingly stressed, short-tempered. They'd been seen arguing at a restaurant. One of the lawsuits against Marcus was moving forward, with damaging evidence coming to light. Jason felt no satisfaction in this. Just a kind of distant sadness for the woman he'd once loved, who'd traded substance for sparkle and was learning the difference the hard way. 5 months after the divorce, Jason stood on the construction site of his affordable housing project. The foundation had been poured, the framing was going up, and the building was starting to take shape exactly as he designed it. Workers called out to each other in multiple languages. Kenji supervised a team installing the custom woodwork, and Alicia consulted with the landscaping crew about native plants and rain gardens. It was chaos and noise and dust, and it was perfect. "Mr. King." Jason turned to see a young woman in a business suit approaching, picking her way carefully across the uneven ground. She looked vaguely familiar. "I'm Jennifer Walsh with the Metropolitan Journal," she said, extending her hand. "We're doing a feature on innovative urban development, and your project came to our attention. Would you be willing to talk about it?" Jason hesitated. He'd deliberately avoided publicity, not wanting this to become about him. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about proving that good design and affordability can coexist." "That's exactly the angle we want to explore," Jennifer said. "Please, 20 minutes. He agreed, and they sat on a stack of lumber while Jennifer asked thoughtful questions about his vision, his process, his goals for the project. Jason found himself relaxing, speaking passionately about the need for housing that served communities rather than exploiting them. "One last question," Jennifer said. "How are you funding this? Most developers need significant backing for a project this size." "Private investment," Jason said carefully. "From someone who believes in the mission." It wasn't a lie. He was the private investor and he did believe in the mission. The article ran 2 weeks later, a full-page spread with photos of the construction site and a detailed discussion of Jason's approach. He'd expected it to generate some local interest, maybe attract a few curious architects or students. What he didn't expect was for it to go viral. The story was picked up by architecture blogs, urban planning forums, and social media. Jason's phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, partnership proposals, and messages from people who'd been inspired by the project. A nonprofit focused on housing equity reached out about potential collaboration. A university asked him to give a guest lecture. A documentary filmmaker wanted to follow the project from completion to occupancy. And then, inevitably, Victoria saw it. Jason was in a meeting with his team when his phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. He ignored it, but during the break, curiosity got the better of him. "Jason, it's Victoria. I saw the article. We need to talk." He stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. An hour later, another text. "Please, it's important." He blocked the number. But Victoria apparently wasn't giving up that easily. She showed up at the construction site 3 days later, picking her way across the lot in heels entirely unsuited to the terrain. Jason saw her coming and considered walking the other direction, but something made him stay. She looked different, thinner, more brittle somehow. Her designer clothes seemed to wear her rather than the other way around, and there were stress lines around her mouth that he didn't remember. "Jason," she said, slightly breathless from her walk across the site. "Thank you for seeing me." "I didn't have much choice," he said evenly. "You showed up at my job site." "I know. I'm sorry. She looked around at the construction, at the building taking shape. "I saw the article. This project, it's amazing. How did you fund it?" Jason supplied. "Is that what you want to know?" Victoria had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm just confused. When we were together, you never mentioned." "I inherited money," Jason said simply, "from my grandfather. It came through right before you left." He watched her process this, saw the exact moment comprehension dawned. Her face went pale, then flushed red. "You had money? This whole time?" "No. I had money for about 2 weeks before you walked out. I was going to tell you that night, actually. Had champagne and everything." Jason kept his voice neutral, conversational. "Found your note instead." Victoria seemed to struggle for words. "Jason, if I had known. You would have stayed?" Jason finished. "Maybe, but for the wrong reasons." "That's not fair, isn't it?" Jason met her eyes. "You left because you thought I couldn't give you the life you wanted. You chose someone based on his bank account. If you'd known about my inheritance, you would have stayed for the same reason. Not because you loved me, but because I could finally afford to be the person you wanted me to be." "I did love you," Victoria said, her voice breaking slightly. "Maybe, but not enough to stay when things weren't glamorous. Not enough to believe in me." Jason took a breath, surprised at how calm he felt. "Victoria, I'm not angry anymore. I'm actually grateful. You leaving gave me the freedom to figure out who I am outside of your expectations. And that person," he gestured at the building behind him, "is someone I actually like. Marcus and I." Victoria started, then stopped. "It's not working out." "I'm sorry to hear that," Jason said, and meant it. "The article said you're not married," Victoria said quietly. "I thought maybe we could talk. Really talk. About us. About what happened. About whether." "No," Jason said gently but firmly. "That door is closed, Victoria. I wish you well, I really do. But we're done. We've been done." She looked at him for a long moment, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I made a mistake." "Yes," Jason agreed. You did. But so did I. I let you define my worth. Let you make me feel small. I won't do that again. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded slowly. You look happy, she said finally. Happier than I ever saw you. I am. Jason realized it was true. I hope you find that too. Genuinely. She left then, carefully making her way back across the construction site. Jason watched her go, feeling a kind of gentle closure. That chapter of his life was truly finished now. No loose threads or lingering what-ifs. Everything okay? Kenji appeared at his elbow, watching Victoria's retreating figure. Yeah, Jason said. Everything's exactly as it should be. 6 months later, Jason stood in the courtyard of his completed housing project. The building rose around him, all clean lines and warm wood, exactly as he'd envisioned. The ground floor housed a community center, a small cafe, and spaces for local artists and businesses. Above, 32 units provided affordable, beautiful homes for families who'd been priced out of most neighborhoods. It was opening day, and the courtyard was filled with future residents, local officials, community members, and the team that had made it all possible. Mayor Harrison gave a speech about innovative urban development. The head of the housing equity nonprofit talked about what this project represented for the city. Then it was Jason's turn. He stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the crowd, and felt a wave of emotion he hadn't expected. 3 years ago, he began, I believed success meant impressing other people, meant accumulating the right things, living in the right places, becoming someone others would envy. And I was miserable, though I couldn't admit it. He paused, gathering his thoughts. This building represents a different definition of success. One based on contribution rather than accumulation. On community rather than individual wealth. On building something that serves a genuine need rather than just generating profit. Jason looked at Kenji and Alicia in the crowd, at David and Maya from the coffee shop, at the workers who'd built this place with skill and care, at the families who would make it home. I'm grateful, he said. Grateful to everyone who believed in this vision. Grateful to the community for welcoming us. And grateful for the lessons that brought me here, even the painful ones. Especially the painful ones. As the event wound down and residents began touring their new homes, Jason found a quiet corner of the courtyard. He sat on a bench Kenji had crafted from reclaimed wood, watching children explore the playground Alicia had designed, listening to the sounds of a community coming together. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, but this time he opened it. Jason, I saw the coverage of your project opening. I wanted to reach out and say I'm proud of you. What you've built is remarkable. I'm getting help now, therapy, trying to figure out who I am outside of material things. I won't bother you again, but I wanted you to know that watching you succeed in such a meaningful way has inspired me to work on myself. Thank you for that. Be well. Jason read the message twice, then typed a simple response. Thank you for telling me. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. Be well. He put the phone away and looked up at the building. This was just the beginning. He had plans for 3 more projects like this, each in a different neighborhood, each adapted to serve the specific community. He'd established a foundation focused on supporting young architects and designers who wanted to prioritize social impact. He'd started teaching a class at the local university on sustainable, community-oriented design. The money that had come to him, that inheritance that Victoria had never known about, had become not an end but a means. A tool for building the kind of world he wanted to live in. Jason, Maya called from across the courtyard, waving him over. Come meet Mrs. Chun. She wants to talk to you about turning her unit's extra bedroom into a library for the building. Jason stood up, smiling. There was work to do. Not the kind of work that would make him rich, he already was, but the kind that would make him proud. He crossed the courtyard toward Maya and Mrs. Chun, toward community and purpose and a future he was building one thoughtful decision at a time. Victoria had left him for a millionaire, thinking money was the key to happiness. She'd been wrong about so many things. But Jason had learned the truth. Wealth without purpose was just numbers in an account. Real richness came from using what you had, money, talent, time, privilege, to lift others up, to build something that mattered, to live with integrity even when no one was watching. As the sun set over the courtyard, painting the new building in shades of gold and amber, Jason King felt something he'd never experienced in his marriage, something Marcus Hendrick's millions could never buy: peace. And that was worth more than any fortune. If the story touched your heart, subscribe now. We share real tales of struggle, redemption, and unexpected miracles that prove life can change in a single moment. Don't miss stories that remind us what truly matters. Hit subscribe, because everyone deserves to hear stories of hope and transformation.